Thanks very much to Funding in the Commons. This is my first time at this conference. I am also fairly new to Web3, so it has been a mind-expanding experience. And I have a lot of ideas now that I probably didn't have when I was putting these slides together, so hoping to talk to you more after. Just quick note on my program. I'm the new executive director of a new program that's at UCSF and Berkeley that's seeking to join the power of AI, machine learning, new statistical method, and clinical and public health excellence. Obviously, I'm speaking to you as someone who has multiple interests in the topic of the talk. I am also a patient, so that's me on the right, doing what I do every day, which is check my blood sugar using an old school glucose meter because I'm a diabetic. I'm someone who's had the privilege of a lived experience of in-person but fairly radical decentralized participation in movements to change the expectations of what the public can do in terms of health. And I'm also someone who has spent a lot of time in the pharmaceutical development space looking at how to increase data access and resources, particularly in the global south. So all of those things are sort of rolled up into the question of how health data is used and for whose benefit. I'm sure I'm not alone in hating the metaphor of data as the new oil in its basic extractive implications. But if data is the new oil, which is how it's regarded by many in the marketplace, health data is particularly precious and valuable, not only because it contains information about how we might live or stop living, and not only because it's tied to extremely personal aspects of our lives, but also because, for example, for me, who has now entered into multiple databases as someone with a chronic condition, or for those of you who've had your genome sequenced, that will never go away. That will be true for me for as long as I live. So unlike a credit card, you can't kind of cancel your digital identity. And finally, our health data is updated continuously and through multiple means. So as I've moved about the conference, I've seen many people with Fitbits, or I know that some people like me have glucose meters. I've seen Oura rings. At least those of us who get our healthcare in the US, about 93% of health systems have electronic health records. So a huge amount of data constantly being generated with potentially amazing benefit for AI and machine learning to extract insights about us as people and patients. And yet, the LLMs have entered, and we haven't even gotten to agents in this slide, but there has an enormous explosion of interest in the health industry. This is just one very partial survey of entry that Kaiser put together, but basically billions and billions of dollars being spent on sort of putting together the power of AI and health data for various purposes and to various ends. And yet with all of that, we are really falling deeply short. So electronic health records, I don't know how many of you, I've been interested because I'm a fairly recent transplant to California. So some people in Kaiser, for example, have a single medical record number for the course of their lifespan here. But for most of us, we have seen multiple health providers, multiple health systems. For digital health, again, explosion in the industry, but extremely fragmented. So for example, my diabetes, I also am managing some blood pressure issues. I have a smartwatch that measures how much I sleep or how many steps I take. I have a portable blood pressure cuff. None of those things talk to one another, and none of them are integrated with my electronic health record. So super fragmented. And then to the extent that they use algorithmic decision-making, it's mostly for simple prediction based on the way that things have been, including all of the biases and inequities that have pervaded in healthcare. And also, to be honest, not taking advantage of some of the methods that would answer the much more interesting questions, like what if I had changed medications 2 weeks earlier, or many, many different things that sort of distinguish between just simple elements of fact and actual inference that could really help us drive clinical decision-making. And I should say that just, for example, in diabetes, there is also a wealth of apps, a wealth of algorithmic notifications no visibility into how strong they are or how good they might be or how they might be improved, because in fact, they are black box algorithms. You just kind of have to take it on faith that the company that has generated these things knows what it is doing, and you sort of get the alert, but no visibility, even if you're a computer scientist, into how it might be improved or evaluated. So, in keeping with the spirit of the Commons, and I know this picture is a very 19th century version of the Commons. Before I came, now I would probably use a different image, but representing the digital Commons is a complicated proposition, but I think you probably get the idea that it would be amazing to have a place where researchers could, I don't want to say graze, but let's say work collaboratively on pooled data. If there were a way to stream all the data from my devices and your devices and others in some privacy-preserving way, to be able to stream it, collect it, to share notebooks and code, and then to return that data and insights to patients and to clinicians. For those of you who are working as developers or in computer science or data science, there is, I think, how many people are familiar with Jupyter Notebooks? Yeah, so a lot of people. So obviously the idea of, Nature called this one of 10 computer codes that transform science, but about 10 million scientists a month use Jupyter Notebooks to share in the cloud, collaborative code, visualizations that other people have developed that you too could use, etc. And so the question is whether we could imagine something similar for health. And I have colleagues who are working on something called Jupyter Health, which would again be a sort of a platform, middleware, to be curatable for mix and match data sets, to be vendor agnostic, to bring that ethos of shareable code and notebooks, to allow for comparative testing of algorithms and benchmarking, and of course then to be privacy preserving and return benefit to patients and clinicians. This is the team that is working on it, and it's being led by Fernando Perez, who's one of the founders of Project Jupyter, and also by my faculty colleague and co-director Ida Sim, who is both a leading informaticist who has focused on interoperability her whole life, but also a practicing primary care physician. This team is also working with Common Health. I don't know how many of you, I know this is probably an Apple-focused crowd. Common Health is an Android-based app available in 55 countries. It allows you to basically to download your health data and hold it on your phone. You can decide who to share it with and for how long in terms of research. It has basically links to about 15,000 different health systems and providers and labs. So whether you get your care from the VA or from Kaiser or from a clinic in Kenya, or your lab is Quest, or you basically can aggregate this data on your phone and carry it with you. It is not sold. It is basically, it is not shared without your consent, and you can revoke your consent at any time. The bigger vision is not just digital health, but actually a number of mission-aligned platforms which are sort of aggregating important health data to enable research, which might be joined. So Nightingale Open Science is another one of these. It's not about digital health technology so much as aggregating from around the world tissue samples, waveform data from ECGs, microscopy, mammograms, TB chest smears, and making it available for free for researchers. All of these data are ground truth with at least one real medical outcome. So it's not just what a radiologist thought would happen, but it's actually what happened to that patient. And the idea, I think, is that if we could create the will to share, which is quite absent in the healthcare industry at the moment, we could begin to build what the organizers of this conference have called the infrastructure of resilience with health data. This slide is the one that I probably would most need to redo after coming to this conference. As to be honest, before the conference, I did not know how to DAO. I was not aware of, these kinds of certificates, cyber certs. I was not aware of the possible insights that chicken communities could give us on intentional gathering, as we heard this morning. I have drawn a lot on colleagues who are working on the question of what is public AI, because as we know, at least particularly in the US, AI has been largely the domain of certain large mega companies. And the question of what is public AI and what collaborative mechanisms to decide the direction of AI tools has been relatively slim. So I don't know how many people have looked at Gideon Litchfield, who was here but I think had to leave, his musings on public AI in his Substack, or have followed the model of CERN in Europe, which is supported by multiple EU countries for basic scientific research, but actually is available to all countries of the world with a commitment to transparent and open science. Again, I realize that these are sort of old school governance models that are not as radical, participatory, and decentralized as much as what we've heard about here. And it would be interesting to think about what some of the tools that you all are much more familiar with might bring to the health data ecosystem. The classic tragedy of the 19th century commons was that more people grazed than replenished the pasture, or more people fished than replenished the sea. And so have been very interested here in thinking about how we might return value to patients who contributed. Was moved and interested by our Open Ledger colleagues' proposal that we heard just before this one. And I will say that in the world of healthcare, even though the Latin root for the word data comes from the same root as that which means to give, there's much more attention to what is given than to the giver. So very few mechanisms to return value to those who contribute data. Very interested not just in whether or not we could give them a share of a token for that effort, but also whether we could support people to have a different relation to the idea of data contribution so that they actually had some support for using the LLMs and these other tools that are available themselves as they move through their journey to seeking better health. I will just end here by saying that I really think that we could do something together and transform what is a super fragmented, super siloed, super proprietary ecosystem of walled gardens rich with health information while locking out others, or what my colleague Ida Sim calls the peril of 1,000 flowers blooming, but with no coordination or ability to aggregate. And so really, it's more inducing of allergies than it is of benefit, to something that's much more like a shared garden where you could assemble and curate data that was matched to people with multiple conditions across the life course, and an approach to health research that recognized that we would be stronger if we were open source and sharing. Thank you.